Hello? Does this thing work? This is the Peak Boredom Podcast.
So on three. One, two, three. Hello guys, welcome to Peak Boredom. Woo! Today we have like two special guests with us. We have Nabilla and Krasi, who are our friends.
Nabilla is one of my friends from middle school, and Krasi is Inga's friend.
We met each other in uni.
Okay, so I work in the UK. I work for a government-backed up company, and I work in offshore wind energy. So government-backed company, what it means is that we're not just working for a profit company, but we're actually interested in like increasing jobs in the sector, increasing innovation, and accelerating renewable energy in the sector as a whole. We do not own wind farms, so we're not operators, but we work on projects that actually accelerate technologies that help the wind sector. So that might be like methods for improving the operation of the wind farm, or it can be like better materials to use on your wind turbine or anything else. But yeah, that's me.
Nabilla?
Okay, I'm Nabilla. I'm Mars' friend, and at the moment I'm working at Climate Bonds Initiative. It is a not-for-profit. It's a public advocacy organization, and what we do is basically we try to highlight green investment opportunities around the world, try to grow the bond market. But for me specifically, I focus on Southeast Asia, and the goal is to ultimately draw in green capital or green money into Southeast Asia by highlighting the green investment opportunities there.
So I guess let's start with that, because before this call, basically, we were talking about that particular topic. What does green essentially mean? And like, maybe what's the difference between sustainability and that entire concept? Green.
Because it's actually interesting. That's like one of the questions, it's one of the objectives that we're trying to tackle in Southeast Asia, or not Southeast Asia, like generally in the world. How do you define green? What is green? Because most people are not aware of it, but a lot of people have climate or environmental goals to achieve. So at least the way it is defined, from generally speaking, it's any projects that are going to help with climate adaptation and mitigation or any climate solution. That's kind of how I understand it. So like, for example, renewable energy is one, waste management plant is one, low carbon transportation. So anything that can reduce the amount of carbon in the air, have some positive environmental impact. That's the definition in like green. It is a buzzword though. Just like sustainability is like throw around like a buzzword, like it's such a cool word. But yeah, that's the summary of it, of like what green means.
Yeah. So for me, green is wishy-washy term. Sorry about that.
I
But,
agree.
but
Yeah.
sustainability actually does have a definition. So one of the definitions is actually using current resources without compromising the future of their generations and their resources. So this basically has two schools of thought. You have one school of thought that is like, we should convert to green energy so that we don't use up all the oil or coal in the world, because so that future generations have it if they need it, and you don't destroy a resource. And that's what the approach that most countries take. And then there's countries like Norway. Norway is taking another approach to what sustainability means, and instead they're using their oil that's in the sea. They're very rich because of their oil and gas, obviously. And what they're doing is that they are making money from oil, but all those money that they're making, they're actually saving for future generations. So they're saving so much money that future generation would be able to afford any technology that substitutes oil.
Is there then a difference between like sustainable and renewable energy?
Yeah.
Also, hold on sustainability, I think there's another broadly used concept, the balance between social, economic, and environmental impact. Have you guys heard of the triple bottom line? So it's basically like, being able to create economic growth, fulfill social objectives, and while protecting or like maintaining the damage that you do to the environment. So it's like you have three pillars and you have to be able to balance them both, and that's the definition of sustainability. And that's kind of, I guess that's the school of thought that I'm in, or at least that with my work, that's kind of like my anchor.
Yeah, so essentially I think what you mean is like we need to be able to balance the three without compromising one, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like common knowledge how like with economic growth you overuse fossil fuel, you overuse natural resources, you're eroding all these resources. That's not really balancing the environmental aspects. Or like socially, like if you grab land from like small farmers, or if you allocate the resources only to the wealthy, that's not socially sustainable, right? So that's what it means, without over compromising like the other pillars.
And back to Krasi, you were mentioning the difference between sustainability and renewable energy.
I guess that it's that you can be sustainable in multiple ways. You can use fossil resources, but use the money from fossil resources to actually, like, for example, carbon capture, which neutralizes the carbon that you've created in the environment. Or you can actually, like, you can either do that, or for example, you can just switch to renewable energy where you wouldn't have as much carbon. You obviously have carbon there.
Like, guys, have we talked about like why climate is an issue or why is it important? Because I think that's like one of the most important points, and we haven't touched upon that.
I think if we going back to why we're talking about renewable energies and like sustainability, climate change has been a lot in the topic we are now, especially in the pandemic we're in. And I think the way we talk about climate change often is inaccessible and complex, that people don't want to start talking about it. This is why we're having this conversation right now with 4 different people in the 4 different fields. I think I'm studying urban design and urban planning. Coming from urban planning, a lot of the things and solutions that we think about neighborhoods actually is affected by the way climate change affects us, and the idea that climate change doesn't affect us equally. A lot of the people that are the one I'm studying think climate change is a science problem. So a lot of the solutions think of for neighborhoods are not sustainable. By sustainable, I mean they're not something that neighborhoods can tangify and like use it in their own way. But the more that I'm in this field, I think that we talk about the complex system that climate change actually is, that we should collaborate and collectively talk to residents, as we are talking about it with academics and people in the government, to have this tangible solution. That's the way I'm learning it right now. That's why I think it's important that we talk about it here. But what do you guys think?
It's okay. Maybe I can talk about why it matters to me. Actually, it's very personal. The reason of like why it matters is
you could.
For me, it's very personal, and I think it's because, in a way, if I don't focus on climate solutions today, if I'm not pushing, or if people are not pushing for climate solutions, it'll cost our future. It'll cost the young people's future, my future. Like, I don't want to live in a city that is very heavily polluted, like Jakarta right now, or like Tangerang right now, which is very heavily polluted. And if we want to talk about, I guess, how climate change unfolds, or like the kind of history or background of climate change, is part of the reason why the climate is changing is because humans, our civilization historically have produced so much carbon emission, right, through fossil fuels, coal, mainly fossil fuel, and then in a way that it creates a greenhouse gas effect, make our earth warmer, and as a result causes like rising sea level, changing weather pattern, all those stuff that people are talking about, floods. And like, for me, I think it really is, it's gonna cost me my future. It's gonna cost me like my lungs in a way. That's the reason why I think it's important. That's why I care so much about it. And then I think the other thing that is like, I guess it's kind of like annoying, and I don't see it as like fair. Like, a lot of these fossil fuels are produced by richer countries. Like, I'm talking about the EU, I'm talking about America, United States. United States historically have produced the most carbon, and it's not fair how like small islands who haven't been consuming are the one who's like suffering the most. Like Indonesian rainforest, like Indonesian people who live in the coast, they're gonna be suffering. So I guess in that sense, it's very personal to me, because it's like, duh, Indonesia is my home, and also like I know people who got affected by the forest burning, people who got affected by flood, even though I wasn't personally affected to it. So in a way, it's a charged topic for me, and that's why I'm like dedicating, or at least that's why I'm focusing on this topic.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the whole forest burning thing, and like that we're talking about it in a pandemic, because people don't realize the knock-on effect that urbanization has on, one, the climate, and two, the actual induction of a pandemic. So what actually happens?
The induction of a pandemic,
like the way the pandemic starts sometimes. So there are multiple types of diseases, of course, and one category of diseases is what they call zoonotic. Zoonotic diseases are diseases that have jumped from animals into humans, and that specifically, of course, the COVID-19 that we're talking about, we don't exactly know where it came from, but we knew it came from an animal. And same with HIV. HIV came from primates, and then it jumped into humans. And animals, of course, have very different diseases from ours. And if we extend into their habitat, then what happens is animals don't have anywhere to go. Where do they run? They run to cities. And the thing about viruses and bacteria is survival of the fittest. No one talks about this concept, but what happens is all these viruses and bacteria, they want to compete. They want to survive. And in order to survive, if it takes them modifying themselves to jump into a human to survive, they will do it. And so by cutting down rainforests and chasing animals out of their habitat, you're increasing the risk of an animal disease jumping from an animal into a human. And that's, of course, a lot of people have seen those videos of like orangutans who are struggling to cling on to like the burning trees that have been basically torn down for oil plantations and stuff like that because of a demand for palm oil. And palm oil is like an entirely different field that we're not going to talk about because that's like
it's big in Indonesia. I think it's like one of the main environmental/social problems in Indonesia. But sometimes it could be like I don't know if it's misunderstanding is the right word, but like misperception about like what the solution is. People should be moving forward.
I think people don't realize how not complex as in there's no way to solve it, but there's a type of collaboration that is needed in order to truly understand what is needed for these people who are involved already in fossil fuel and need to get out of it and also make money, but also how to make better energy that covers the energy that we need as a country. So I guess going back, I think the first time I realized climate change was an issue in urban design. A lot of people don't know that in Toronto, there's an issue in flooding actually, and there was a big flooding that happened a year ago where all the little houses and like apartments actually got flooded really high. And that is a climate issue for sure, right? And I know Indonesia has the same issues.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because a lot of just going off what Mars is saying, a lot of the threats from climate, rising sea level, increased floodings, increased forest fire, air pollution, like they all will affect the way cities are designed. They are all going to affect the way future buildings are designed. They're going to affect a lot of our lives. But at least what I noticed, sometimes we don't really make these connections to problems that like imminent and immediate to us to the issue of climate. That's what I noticed at least.
So I kind of have the same option. Like basically climate change is a problem because it's a rabbit hole. Like you can go and you have no idea what's gonna come out when you do that. So you have no idea what's gonna come out when you cut the rainforest down. You have no idea what's gonna happen when sea levels are rising. Like in the UK, one example is that UK will be one of the countries that get hotter. So there are some countries in the world that will get colder. There are some countries that will get hotter. UK will be one of those that will, I think, reduce the amount of rain and will also get hotter with the years. But the problem with that is that in UK currently you don't have any air conditioning because you don't really.
That's something that people don't discuss. The UK, right? Before we went to uni, so this was back in 2014 to 2015, before we entered university, I read an article that said that the UK is about to have a heat stroke, and that heat stroke was 24 degrees Celsius.
Oh my god, isn't it already happening? My friend told me like it's already.
So back in 2015, 24 degrees Celsius was considered a heat stroke. This weekend, we had a 30 degree Celsius heat stroke. Every year, every summer, it increases. UK houses were not built for air conditioning. In Canada, where Mars is living, she has a thermostat in her house, okay? They have heating systems and they have air conditioning systems. The UK does not have that. The only air conditioning in my entire building is currently in the reception area. That's it.
Yeah, so the problem is that you don't have air conditioning in houses. The temperatures are gonna rise. People are gonna actually start buying air conditioning, and currently the grid is accustomed. So problem is that, for example, it can cause a meltdown in the grid if people start buying air conditioning and suddenly they start turning on the air conditioning at the same time when it's the hottest day of the year. And the grid may not be able to cope with that because suddenly you have like 23 million households that suddenly have bought an air conditioning. For the past 50 years, for the whole history of the UK, you haven't had this case before. So suddenly you have climate change that is affecting you, that suddenly your electricity use is absolutely going off the roof. And this will create problems with your grid, with how you produce electricity. You can cause meltdowns in the grid. You can have cities that lose electricity and stuff like that. So basically, it affects it in many ways, and most of the time it's really hard to make the link. And this is what makes kind of climate change not as understandable, but most people.
Yeah, it's very not straight. It's like not as straightforward, I think, as
Yeah,
most of us would like it to be. It's very intersectional. It's like it's gonna talk about like different countries' responsibilities, different effects around the globe, different culprits, I guess.
it's easy to understand climate change, Earth is heating, which causes level rise. This is one of the easy concepts. But how do you explain that climate change would result in more electricity? And how do you explain the fact that why do you have not only floodings, but why do you even have tsunamis and stuff like that? Why do you have regions that are becoming rainier than they normally were? So there are a lot of concepts that don't easily relate from one to another, like earthquakes. Like, how do you relate climate change to earthquakes? Because they are getting
to climate change.
yeah. Seismic motion and stuff like that, they're related to climate change. So there stuff that are easy to relate, but stuff that are very hard to relate, and most people don't understand them. I remember one of the climate deniers jokes was like, they were saying sea level is not rising because of Archimedes law. When if you have if you have a cube in the water, they were like, if you melt that cube, it would still take the same space. And they were like, this is why sea level is not rising. And I'm like, yeah, and what about all the water all the ice that's actually on land? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to intersectionality of this issue and like how we're not actually collaborating efficiently. Going back to our class, he said the solution was neighborhoods need to be more resilient. And in urban like knowledge, resilient actually means like, oh, this is the neighborhood's fault and they should be the ones solving the issue. And I think that's the first time I'm like, oh, does he actually believe climate change is a big issue? And why are we making solutions that are like very, very non-collaborative and non-collective?
Yeah, I think the reason why climate is very interesting is because like it's inherently inherently an international and global topic, because you can't solve it without you can't solve climate change without countries collaborating with each other, because like I said, different countries are producing different level of carbon, different capacity, different level of economic development as well, and at the end of the day, everyone else around the globe is going to be affected by rising carbon emission, right? So you can't really solve it without actually maybe working with China or working with the United States or working with like protecting the small people from the small islands or archipelagic country as a result of rising sea level. So
yeah, because people don't realize one of the other problems is because I think it might have something to do with the word global warming specifically. So people think instead of climate change, the climate is changing, our weather is getting worse. What they think is, oh, it's just warming. The whole planet's warming. Yes, but that means that like some areas are going to have harsher winters. Some of them are going to have less rain, more rain, and stuff like that. Specifically with Indonesia, because we are in what they call the coral triangle, the heat kills. So people don't understand how coral works. Okay, coral is like a calcium skeleton. It's just a skeleton. The bacteria that live on it is the reason why it has ecosystems growing around it. And of course, if we have that ecosystem, we have fish, which is a resource that goes into smaller islands and stuff like that. So if the heat increases, the bacteria dies, and what happens? That's what they call coral bleaching, and also like the acidity of the sea level changes and stuff. It essentially kills the coral, which kills the ecosystem the fish live in, which influence the resources and the food available to like smaller, more remote areas, and people don't realize that. And it affects tourism. No one wants to go to a blank coral reef. Like no one wants to go to like a coral graveyard, if you will. What? Why are you laughing, Krasi? It's true. Would you fly all the way to Southeast Asia to swim in like essentially an area that has no fish?
Coral, yeah.
I think that I was watching videos, like I think that there was a big thing that you actually go diving in order to videotape areas that are full of plastic everywhere and like plastic bags and metal cans and stuff. So like people that are just swimming, diving, and just like, look at all the plastic everywhere.
Oh, it's
'Cause they-
absolutely, yeah, that's crappy because people are tossing disposable masks and gloves into the ocean. Like, why? Why the ocean? There's a trash can nearby. Toss it there.
I mean that's a whole another topic because I've never understood that. Today we took a walk in the park with my boyfriend and there was cans in the lake. Like, why? Why would you throw that? And there's like ducks and gooses everywhere. And
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
not, like,
Cynicism, human cynicism is like a different question altogether. Those people who threw bricks at a swan's nest, like, I think we have to exclude that from the conversation because that's a different topic about like just why. Why is it so hard to just not do that?
But sometimes, even if you are still not throwing your trash, like even if you throw your trash in an appropriate place, but then you take it to a landfill that doesn't recycle, it's not going to be any difference, right? Whether you recycle or you throw your trash.
Yeah,
I
there's a
think
problem
that's
currently that they've reached the
case in-
maximum. That they've reached the maximum capacity of plastic recycling. So
Where?
like. I remember which country, I forgot which country it was, that they, in some countries, they've now reached the maximum capacity for
Yeah.
plastic recycling. Even if you recycle, we can't do anything about the plastic. But like, but going back to the ducks and whatever, there's like, even stuff that you do that you think you're doing good, but you're actually not. So for example, a lot of people, when you go, they feed the ducks and the gooses bread. And even sometimes the koi fish, I think that was like the orange one that they have in lakes. So sometimes they feed them like bread, and actually like none of those animals can actually digest bread. It's really, really bad for them. But people are just like, oh, it's eating it, this means it can eat it. And then when we go around the lake, almost everybody feed it bread, which is really bad for gooses and fish and ducks. And they think they're doing good, but they're actually slowly killing them.
I feel like you can accidentally fall into that trap with climate solutions, or at least environmental solutions, or any solution that is oriented to like consuming or consumption. You know, like conscious consumption, green consumption, all those buzzwords. Because
So you can be like somebody who's actually trying to do good, but because you've just Googled it and you don't really understand, and you're like, oh, what do I need to do? And then suddenly they propose to you 3 steps that, for example, if you do them too much, for example, they actually might be bad.
It ties in with if you biofuel, right? It's a renewable energy. But if you keep making it in a way that's capacity wise, it's not renewable anymore, then it also becomes a non-renewable energy. I think going back,
This is what makes, because there is a really big question: is biofuel actually renewable? And with wind and solar, it clearly is. But with biofuel, there's very specific things that define whether biofuel is renewable. At what rate should you actually extract it for it to be renewable? Because peat is technically renewable. It's been like, it restores itself. It just takes 1 million years. So
we don't live that long.
also, what about like individual solutions, like maybe not consuming palm oil, or what other example? Drinking metal straws. You know, all the solutions, it might not have the desired effect of actually solving the large-scale environmental problem. That's what I'm trying to like say. A lot of these problems require systemic solution, right? Like, who is installing renewable? The government. Who is installing, who is managing the forest? The government. Like, I mean, it's not just the government. I guess industry also has a play in it. Plastic industries, or like owners of coal projects.
What I have noticed is that quite a lot of companies start to understand the role they play in the whole thing. And the reason why they're starting to understand that is because they actually realize that they can make money from being more sustainable. And I can give a couple of examples. So in Britain, currently oil and gas companies are investing in offshore wind. So you have oil and gas companies that have now started buying wind farms and constructing them. And they're trying to be more renewable. First, because they know that this is the buzzword. Second, because they need the green points. And third, they suddenly realize that in here, this can actually make them a lot of money. Another example is, for example, with plastics. So you have companies like HP. I was doing my dissertation in undergrad about them, and they started being more green, not because it was the buzzword, but they realized, oh wait, we can actually make money if after people have used our laptop, we retrieve it back, disassemble it, and reuse all the parts, or melt them and reuse them again. So it just is they just realized it might be actually way cheaper of getting their own computers back, being more green in front of the people, but at the same time making money from reusing materials instead of buying them raw. And this is why companies are tanking.
Yeah.
I mean, it's true. I mean, it's also, that's the reality too, right? Like if you don't adapt to kind of these like environmental problems or climate problems, you're not, like, businesses are not going to survive in the future. You're going to have, because like climate change itself creates a hostile environment that's going to be a threat to your business. That's why it's more profitable to actually opt for the sustainable strategy or sustainable solutions to be profitable in the long run.
Yeah, so nowadays you need like stuff that will make you resilient to other companies. So how do you achieve resilience against other companies in the future? So for example, like how can you be a new company producing phones in a market that's already really saturated? And for example, if you're a European company, you're like, oh no, I can't do it cheaper than China, for example. What else can I do? And they're like, oh wait, I can actually make sustainable phone. So there are like companies in Europe that are like, you make phones that are completely sustainable, so you can easily disassemble every one of the parts, and you can actually you can melt it and easily recycle it, because that's the problem with technology, you can easily recycle it. And also the other point is that you can easily repair it yourself, thus increasing the life of your technology and reducing your carbon footprint.
That's something that like I think people are not understanding, that e-waste, also electronic waste, so like broken phones and laptops and stuff, you cannot just toss them into a landfill. You cannot just toss them wherever you want, because from what I've learned, I know some villages in the Tangerang area, so I had to attend a seminar on this. People were melting down laptops and stuff like that to retrieve the metals from them, and what happens is it ends up emitting toxic waste, and then that I think a couple villages in the Tangerang area had to be sealed off because it was too toxic for humans to reside in. Just a disclaimer for people listening, do not melt down laptops. It's not worth death, essentially.
And no, don't say just laptop, just say any technology. Do not melt your iron, do not melt your phone.
Don't melt technology.
Are they melting them to extract
the metals? Yeah. The metals from them are considered precious if you accumulate them.
Oh yeah, like in the motherboard of a computer, even like in a single chip, you have like you have like 40 materials, and most of them are very, very precious.
Like gold, right? Like
no, not something gold. I'm talking like metals that you can now find 2 places in the whole world. For example, I know that copper and gold and silver are very easy ones because you can sell them everywhere. But they're actually materials that are very precious because you can find them, for example, in 2 places in Africa. And there are even
oh my goodness. No, we're mentioning like Africa. It reminds me of like the huge problem with like ethical supply chain and how like they're actually extracting the minerals.
Yeah, that's the whole problem. You have like metals that you extract in Africa, and they're currently considered the new blood diamond. Because you need them in every technology, and even if you need 1 milligram in a phone, imagine like the whole phone market that you have. So you have new materials that you don't heard of every day, but they're suddenly one of those problems that they're being caused in the supply chain.
Yeah, it's a big issue because like essentially they want to profit from it. Well, to be fair, these are people who are not like, they don't belong to the scientific industry. They just thought that melting down motherboards from like thrown away laptops and phones can easily make them profit from like the rare metals and materials inside the motherboard, but they don't realize like the toxic side effects of doing so, which is why e-waste is such a big problem in some areas. So that's just like a disclaimer to our audiences. It's a really toxic process, just something that people are not aware of.
Yeah, but like I think it's also important to ask like, why are they melting? Because like you said, a lot of people might do it because it can generate some sort of revenue to maybe support their family or like support their lives, right? Yeah, I think it's good to ask that, because sometimes we can, especially if like, you know, if we lived in a developed country, if we're rich enough to protect ourselves, we can be very removed from like the problem on the ground, and very removed from like the threats of climate change.
Yeah,
I think I want to argue that that's part of the problem and why people tend to be like indifferent with the problems on the ground. But I think it's super important to keep that in mind, that these problems, like for example, like toxic waste, sending your recycling bags to like developing countries from like the UK or like from America, like these problems affect real people. And like if it's not happening to us, that doesn't mean it's not affecting other people's life in a very fundamental way. And I think this is great that we're like discussing about this and we're talking about this, because I think it can be easily forgotten, the fact that these issues are actually affecting real people very, very poorly, very badly. Like it's affecting their future, but it's also affecting people who are already in the poverty. It's affecting fishermen, it's affecting farmers in terms of how they harvest their farm and all that.
Yeah, I really like what AOC said in the interview with Hassan. What we don't realize is when we talk about these issues, we don't ask about the question, well, why are we doing this? Like if we look at the people who are mining, these are people who need the money and they fall into these toxic problems because they need the money. And how are we also protecting them so they don't lose their job and that they contribute to more renewable and sustainable energy? Because I really agree that it's easy to say like, oh, we shouldn't consume fossil fuel and we shouldn't consume things that have fossil fuel. But wait, people who are contributing, are working in this field, are actually people in the poverty line, and they actually make money. And if we just remove this kind of big issue and not think about those people and how they'll be affecting, are we like protecting their jobs so we can move them so that we can do renewability? Or are we just kind of like, oh, this is bad? It's just easy to say for like, I'm sorry, rich people, but then
don't apologize to them, they're rich.
I think it goes back again with the way we talk about climate change and how we need to be more accessible the way we talk in one, but we also need to talk about it in a collective and collaborative manner.
In a fair way too.
Yeah, because we can't just say fossil fuel bad. It's kind of like racism, you know? It's like a system, right? And in a system, we need to actually do the groundwork, enable for us to do those renewable energy ideas, which we are doing and which we are doing, I think, pretty well. But yeah, I think there needs to be more discussion on who are
job security, right?
Job security.
Yeah, I agree with Mars.
So yeah, the one big talk in UK right now is, for example, so you have all those people that are working on oil and gas platforms, and sure, you have a growing offshore and even solar energy and onshore wind field. But on a country level, yeah, you're losing 1,000 jobs in oil and gas, but you're making 1,000 jobs in oil. In wind.
In renewables.
But when you actually look at it, it's actually very different, because oil is at one place while your wind is in a completely different place. So you can't suddenly make the people who just lost their job move to the other side of the country just so that they can find another job. And this is like
a good question to ask.
Yeah, it's like how do you actually make that? This is the current question, is like, great, you're creating more jobs, but how are you making sure that the people who are losing jobs will be able to find job, or are you forcing them to move somewhere else? One of the big things is like something that will come into play, at least in offshore wind, in the next 15 years, is, for example, drones. So drones will be used for inspection. For example, from time to time you need to go to the wind turbine and see whether you have any cracks on the blade, because this means that you have a crack inside the blade, which means your efficiency is lower, and you might have a blade that breaks any minute now, or you have a blade flying and breaking other blades.
It can fly?
I mean, it's very aerodynamic, just saying. It has been designed to be aerodynamic.
So like if it breaks off, it can fling off somewhere?
I mean, that's very low chance, but technically, yeah. I think there was there was one thing, one of the planning consents in order to install a turbine onshore was the distance to any cables. So like, and it needed to have a very big distance from any cables or any electrical lines, so that if the blade breaks, it doesn't harm any electrical lines, because then
Wait, quick question. Do wind turbines actually require electricity to function?
no,
Great.
they
Wait, I think it's interesting. We're starting to talk about the different solutions and like what the solution is out there, and I think it's interesting that I think this should be a part of the conversation, like solutions and like opportunities.
It does tie into like one of the other questions that we have, which was, is environmental sustainability, like, is sustainable practice a luxury to some people? That kind of
It shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be, but is it currently, and what can we do about it?
I mean, definitely, I definitely think it's kind of a luxury. I'm just gonna give a simple example. So in Scotland, recycling is something that you're born with. From when you're born, you start learning how to recycle. In front of each houses, you have compost, you have mixed recycling, then you have your normal trash, and they also in Scotland, what they have is that their normal trash, which is for mixed, that can be recycled, is way smaller than your recyclable bins. And because they're collected only once a week or once every 2 weeks, depending on where you live, if you need to actually use the recyclables, because otherwise your trash won't fit. And if there's trash next to the bin men won't get it. They'll just get whatever is in the bin. So if you actually want to throw away your trash, you actually need to recycle it.
So they're basically like forcing people. They're forcing people to recycle by basically saying like, if you overflow your trash, we're not going to collect it.
Yeah, so they have that, and they wouldn't collect the overflown trash. But at the same time, your recycling bins are way bigger than your normal bin. So they're stimulating you to recycle, because if you recycle, you can actually recycle more. While in Bulgaria, so I'm from Bulgaria, and I remember the first time we got like recyclable trash, like, I don't know, I was 11, 12, so like more than 10 years ago, and the bins disappeared after 3 weeks. So we couldn't really recycle because in front of our block, the bins were there. Then in 3 weeks, the bins were not there. I actually have no idea. Or the other classic thing is somebody decides to burn down the bin.
What?
No reason.
Why is this a classic thing?
Because it is.
Wait, Michelle, why are you asking that question, whether it's like a luxury or not? Can you expand on that?
Because what I feel is, in a developed country, so we grew up in Indonesia, and then I went to uni in the UK. And in the UK, there's a lot more quote unquote green initiatives, which is that they encourage you to use reusable bags as opposed to like plastic bags, because plastic bags, they charge you for plastic bags, which was not a thing in Indonesia until quite recently. They charge you to use plastic bags, so it gives like a green initiative and stuff like that. But then also like the plastics that they do use have labels that say that they are biodegradable. Well, in Indonesia, I feel like in order to produce, that was one of the things that I learned during my internship at a university, is that the production of biodegradable plastics is more costly than the single-use plastics that are not biodegradable. And because of that, of course, like street vendors would not be able to afford, because it does tie into the livelihood of a developing country, that people need plastic to let's say, give people takeaway food. Because paper bags are not a thing in Indonesia. It might have to do with humidity and like the amount of water constantly raining around us. When we do rain, we rain like a crap ton of water. And because of that, they want plastic. But then plastic that are biodegradable are more expensive, and therefore street vendors and local people would not be able to afford that plastic. So what do? They don't have that incentive to move into more sustainable practices. And so it therefore becomes a question, are some green initiatives more a luxury to some people than others?
I think that's a really good question that we all should, it's a really good question that we have to ask. And I think it touches upon the different capacity different countries have in order to like tackling this like climate or environmental problems. So in the international climate regime, there's this principle. It's called common goal but differentiated responsibility. So the common goal is to achieve a world where the economy is more sustainable, but differentiated responsibility means like acknowledging the different capacity that people have and where they at in terms of their like economic stage as a country. And I think that's kind of like my cornerstone in terms of like coming up with climate solutions, because climate or environmental solutions, because I agree that some of the proposed or like popular solutions are not really applicable for people who are not privileged. I guess I'm talking about vegetarian food are sometimes more expensive, or like consuming a more organic or green product is more expensive. Like if you can't, some people can't even afford that. You know, some people can't bother worrying about organic products or like green products, and that like the solutions that we should be coming about shouldn't be a solution that is only accommodating people who are like rich or like the elites. It should be, and it should be a solution that applies to everyone. I guess that's where the whole like systemic solution comes in, right? The goal shouldn't be like we all should recycle or consume as clean or as green as possible. It should be about like that thing should be made easy. Like the government should be doing something to make those kind of consumptions easy, because if you don't have an irresponsible supply chain, then you're not gonna have to force yourself to be a responsible consumer, if that makes sense. So like the idea of like conscious consumer, or what's the word? What's the term? You know, like a responsible consumer. Like that idea won't exist if the entire supply chain is actually responsible and sustainable. So I think it's moving from individual actions to like large scale, broader solutions. It's super important.
Yeah, one example for what you said was again in Africa. The problem is that Nestle is one of the big importers of drinking water. You can't eliminate plastic in a country that doesn't even have drinking water, because if they don't have drinking water, this means that they need to buy bottled water in plastic bottles. In quite a lot of countries in Africa, they have this huge problem of that they have like mountains of plastic, and most of that is just it's plastic bottles from water, because people don't have drinkable water. So you have luxury. I think it's important to define it on like different levels. It's luxury. One thing is luxury in one country, and another thing is luxury in another country. So, for example,
and I really don't like the idea of like copy pasting solutions that work in America to like Indonesia, because obviously, like you have to understand the context here. There are some things in Indonesia that is more local and green to do. Like for example, like composting. Composting is it's a solution that is compatible to like the context of Southeast Asian countries, because I want to say more than 50% of the waste that we produce is organic waste. So like kitchen waste, banana leaves, all those stuff, and that would be that's a better solution compared to maybe like if you applied in other countries whose waste component is different. I think looking to solutions in this kind of lens, it would be critical, other than like copy pasting a solution that works in other countries, because obviously different countries have different like abilities and capacities and resources, right?
And I mean climate
change. That's actually another source of biofuel. It's compost, so you can actually make a huge industry if you have a country that has a lot of agriculture and you have a lot of compost, then you can actually make a lot of biofuel from this compost, and it can be very good for the environment. Or you can use it for fertilizer. So if you use it as a natural fertilizer, then you can get other non-natural fertilizers, which would mean that you don't pollute the soil. So it actually is better for your soil, and like obviously better for the future as well.
I guess it goes back that climate change doesn't affect people the same, and that I mean the first thing now we learn in planning is all neighborhoods are different. Therefore, the solutions we think about needs to be good with them, because a lot of times in urban planning there's a copy paste too in solutions, because we think that all cities are the same, but in reality is even different neighborhoods and different residents operate differently, and they would know the momentum and where to tap in to better have solutions than any of us would, which is why collective problem solving is a big thing.
Yeah. And I guess I'm not against conscious consumerism or a more responsible consumption. I think it's more like questioning whether this is the ultimate solution or not, because at the end of the day, you know, it's just one of the first few steps into achieving a system or an economy that is more sustainable, using your buying power, for example. That's like one way, but there are other ways, you know, to be sustainable that doesn't involve like a lot of money.
Do you have an example on the top of your head?
I mean, by not purchasing plastic bottle. Or like, by using, in Indonesia, you use this, it's called besek. You use that, basically it's made of plants and it's a packaging that you put your food in. And that's sustainable. People don't see that as, we should be seeing those as a solution, but it's not being talked about enough. But it's a local solution that is, serving local problems with like sustainability.
Yeah, I think that the other
Or like just not consume at all, just don't use straw. It's as simple as that, instead of like, using metal straw, really.
Yeah, I think one of the
my
big
opinion.
solutions in Asia was bamboo. So bamboo is becoming the new plastic.
Yeah, like,
It's
bamboo
extremely
building.
cheap. It grows by like, what was it? I remember it was like huge grow rate, like a meter per day or something.
Yeah, they do.
Maybe I don't know, but
They do.
I remember it was like something huge. So basically, if you start making everything from bamboo, and bamboo is very versatile, so you can make like boxes from it, you can make straws from it, you can make everything. So you can basically, one of the predictions would be that bamboo is the new plastic of the future. In like 20 years, you wouldn't have single-use plastic; you would just have single-use bamboo.
oh yeah, that's an
That kind of
interesting-
like local solutions, I think.
Because
hasn't been
this is only
exploited enough.
that this is like a solution that's only applicable to one part of the world, and not obviously not.
But it's sustainable, right?
Because
Sustainable.
I guess at the end of the day, we're all solving things on our local basis in your local corner. And it's only fair that the way we make solutions, like the big idea is, of course, to mitigate climate change, but the smaller idea has smaller targets, the way you said it, because I think that's the way to solve stuff in general.
Start small.
Yeah.
start small. Yeah, so don't shame anyone for not doing enough, because people are
Yeah,
trying.
I think.
Yeah.
I think you shouldn't. I think people should try to their best ability to live sustainably. But at the end of the day, we all should acknowledge that this is a systemic problem, and in a way, we solve it is actually to rely on people who are creating the system. It could be corporate, who's influencing the system. It could be the gut. A lot of the times, it's the government. So that's why in climate, strong state action is necessary. And the way we do that, the way we kind of like influence the kind of decisions that these people are making is you can do it through protesting, you can do it through social media, voting is one avenue, demanding responsibilities from our leaders. And I think understand that like individual action is only part of the solution, and it's one of the first few steps to solve this like huge systemic problem is going to be very critical to how fast we are going to achieve climate solution for a sustainable economy.
That's actually very important because a lot of people don't realize the individual role that they can have in that. Quite a lot of people, they can look at like climate change, renewable energy, and they were like, I don't understand that. I don't care.
Yeah, that's true too. And like, I think.
Yeah, but as an individual, you actually hold a huge amount of power, at least over your government. Well, the classic example is like China and it's and all the polluted air that they have, and people started protesting. And now China is actually doing stuff so it can stop polluting its air, because people are actually dying for it, and they started going out on protest. You have numerous examples of how like your voice can actually do that. So France is a really big one. Every time they protest, they don't just go in front of the parliament; they just block everything. So,
well, honestly, I think I understand why people start doing that, because like if you're not seeing any like concrete action, or at least actions that's comparable, or actions that meets the scale of the challenge, like of course you're gonna. I'm frustrated. I don't show it a lot, but like internally, I'm like I'm screaming sometimes.
In historic countries, they're just countries that are very active active individuals. So basically, every time something happens in France, like Greece is another example of that. That is like, for example, reduce pensions or anything that's not interest of people. People like shut down factories.
Oh, good. They're so good at doing
Nobody
that.
can get to work. They don't just go in front of the parliament. They just shut down the country.
Wait, did it work? Actually, maybe.
Yeah. That's the whole point. That Greece and France, at least two examples that I can think of, that they just do that if there's some problem. They don't just protest. They just go and shut down the airport, and nobody can.
And that's how you show like the people in power, like whatever, the president, governor, your priority, right? You have to show them that you're upset to influence the decision that they're taking, because their decision ultimately is going to affect all of us because they're in a position of power.
So that's something that's very important to understand, that you do have a role in that, and it might not be
agree.
I'm not gonna apply. I'm not gonna buy plastic bags or something like that. But you having a voice can really influence that.
Yeah, because when I
Or-
first met Krasi, we were very different. We were very different from now. I mean, like 5 years ago, I think, when I met Krasi, we were both like still not really reusing reusable bags. And then it slowly came into play that suddenly we have reusable straws. I have a metal straw. Krasi
I
has
have silicone one.
Yeah, Krasi has a silicone one. We start using tote bags. At this point, sometimes I don't even use tote bags. I bring my suitcase if it's too heavy. Look, I don't want to carry rice in a tote bag, okay? I'm just gonna bring.
Just for information, her Asian shop is 3 minutes away from her accommodation. So just saying, she needs to carry this rice for 3 minutes.
So that's convenient. I mean, it's like
Efficiency. I'm gonna bring my luggage and like carrying around. But like the point is, we started small and then we started like I have my own reusable cup, both the thermal, both for hot coffee and for cold coffee. Krasi also bought one recently. It's a gradual change, but you have to let people start small. So like you can't shame people into.
Yeah, I mean I know what you're saying about like shaming. I think that's one of, like, generally speaking, if we're trying to like change behavior, I really don't think shaming is productive. Like shaming is not going to.
I don't think shaming is gonna get anyone anywhere in any situation, even outside of climate change. Shaming people for not doing something is not effective. You
Like,
can
I
inform
think-
them.
All of the examples that we have about the tote bags, about reusable cups and everything is because we have been given those things for free. And we're like, yeah, it actually doesn't cost me absolutely anything having this cup, or it doesn't cost me anything. It actually does save me money to go and use the tote bag instead of buying more bags that I don't know what to do later. They just sit in the cupboard.
I mean, my first tote bag, I got it from a conference. That I didn't pay for it, but it made a difference. But I think that for me and Nabilla, I think we started very young in realizing that climate change is an issue. So there are people who are already thinking about this as young generation, but
I think just to the point, like Michelle's point on like shaming, I think like if our goal is to get as many as people, to like support climate, I don't think shame is like the best way to do that. But I think demanding accountability, I guess you need to differentiate between like shaming and demanding accountability. And you should demand accountability. You should actually demand accountability. But in the landscape of climate change, it might not be the best way to demand accountability from individuals, because not all individuals necessarily have the power to like influence the system. I think we need to be targeted in terms of who are we demanding accountability for, the president, or like people who actually have the power to like create a more sustainable economy. Which is like that's why I completely agree with what Krasi said about realizing that I guess everyone have a power, like because. And at least in a democratic country, like everyone has the power to vote, and like voting through your vote, you can set the priorities straight. You want green solutions, or like you want more renewable energy, you want a more sustainable supply chain. Like that's like one way you use that power to influence people who's going to create the solutions.
And the other point is that solutions are long-term solutions are the sustainable ones. Like this is basically what sustainability means. Like if you the example that I was giving in Africa, if you want to stop using plastic, then you just need to give those people drinkable waters. They don't want to pay for plastic. They don't want to pay for water in plastic bottles. They just want water from their taps. So if you provide them like a sustainable solution, which is just having a good sewage system, then you would actually provide them a tool to start being more sustainable and actually solving some of those problems.
I feel like in order to basically teach people that they individually make a difference towards like they have a knock-on effect that can affect like basically every single industry. In order for that to happen, you have to be able to educate people and like encourage them to make a difference in their own way,
Yeah, one more thing that I would add to that is not only be educated about those stuff, but also having a long-term thinking. So one example with the government, you have mentioned till now that the government plays a big part in sustainability, and that's completely true. But the one thing that you ignore about the government is that I'm pretty sure it should be the same in Indonesia, is that your government is in term for 4 years or maybe even less.
That's such an interesting point, and it's like
so So government doesn't care about in 20 years. They want to implement things that please you now, so that you re-elect them immediately. They're not interested in looking at solutions that are going to happen 20 years ahead. And it's the same with companies. Like, companies don't look, very few companies actually look what's going to be the next big thing. They just want to make it to the next quarter.
Yep.
So
They
this
satisfy their investor. They want to satisfy their board.
Yeah.
At like 1 year,
so
generate X amount of revenue.
yeah.
Yep.
So next to being being educated about sustainability, you should also think about the big picture and long term. Because if you do think about long term, this would be the solution that's actually sustainable and best for everybody. Because like most of the time, like oil and gas was never gonna be the solution of the future, but it was a solution for 150 years, or maybe even for 200 years. So this is why they took it. It was cheap and it was a solution for 200 years. But if you actually choose renewable energy and green stuff, then this is a solution forever, not just for the time being.
Basically, when I was doing some research on the stuff of my dissertation, one of the statements that it doesn't just affect my dissertation, but it affects like every field of work, is that people are not willing to invest in something that doesn't give them profit. And we're talking about people
Or
in like
profit immediately. I would add to that.
yeah.
But immediately.
A lot of industries, people are not interested in things that will not get them profit. And providing, let's say, more accessibility to water, is not something that they think about to a future extent, because it's not gonna give them profit. What gives them profit is selling water in plastic bottles to African people. Creating a sewage system is not gonna give them profit. And so as us individually, we need to think about like the long-term solution and our individual contributions towards that. Like us consciously, slowly by slowly, we can demand them to change their practices.
Yeah, I have a like very short example from back home. So what happened like a few months ago was that we had a dam, and suddenly the dam and the lake was completely empty, and the whole city was left without water. And this was because the same government has been in town for the past 10 years, and in that city as well. So what they have been doing is they're like, oh no, we need to change the pipes because the pipes are leaking. And like later turned out that like 90% of the water was actually leaking from the pipes instead of being delivered to the household. So if you need 1 liter, you're actually wasting 9 in order for the water to get to you. And they were like, oh no, but this costs money, so we don't want to do it. We're just not gonna talk about it. And then suddenly the dam was empty. And they didn't have a water for a month because they were just thinking about the short-term solution of providing something that they can see immediately, rather than now we're gonna dig up the whole town so we can change your sewage and your pipes so that you can have water for the next 10 years. Because they were like, oh no, if we dig up the streets, then people won't be happy because then the street will be blocked. And they were like, this is why we're not gonna do it.
I think that is very important, because if you take a look at the consequences of climate threats today, it is actually a result of the actions of the generations before us. Maybe they're not aware of the consequences. Maybe they're not aware that that they're aware that global warming is happening because of fossil fuel, but they choose not to take action to mitigate that. And as a result, this is what's happening today, like with like forest fire, weather patterns, and the way government is going to choose solutions is going to be critical to what the future consequences is going to be. And I think it's true with a lot of choices that governments, that leaders are making, businesses are making. It's like sometimes it's a trade-off. I can use the example of Indonesia. For example, coal at the moment is like the cheapest source of electricity, if you don't take into account, obviously, externality. And the government has to deliver electricity, affordable electricity, to different households. So, like, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to choose renewable energy, or are you going to stay in coal? But if you stay in coal, obviously it's going to affect the carbon emission in the future. So understanding that it is often a trade-off, and sometimes the government or people in power might not take decision that it's not the best decision for us in the future.
It's not optimal.
You can opt for coal, and that is a short-term immediate solution, and it's important, but it's not the best choice moving forward.
And that's why I think like our generation, like specifically, I talked about this with Mars, us as what they call zillennials. So like we are the generation in between the millennials and the Gen Z. We have that mindset of we want to demand change. And the thing is, we are the generation that is gonna enter the workforce. And I think we're in an interesting position we graduated uni So now we have like the tools that society gives us to make the change that we want to see. And
Yeah. And I learned about this like idea when I went to the climate strike in New York, where they're basically saying like we can't be naive and just think that the government or like whoever leaders in power are going to take the right solution without us asking. And that's why I think asking using our voting power is like super important, because being in a position of power, you're like so removed, you're very far from the ground, and you might not actually know like what is in the best of interest for like the public. That's why I think maybe since like I graduated college or senior year, I think I try to voice out what I think more, so I can, you know, make the government see that that's like my priority. And I think if enough people are doing that, it's gonna have the effect of getting government to take the right decision. You know how everyone keep on telling us as a young person, you just go to school, you should just study so you can affect the world 20 years ahead. But you know, if the world is in a very bad situation, like how are you gonna like how can you focus while you're worrying about your future? So I think it's awesome that young people are demanding action, even though they don't have the toolkit to solve it, because it's not their job. It's the job of like the government, it's the job of like the businesses. And I think this is what I'm talking about. We have to demand accountability to the people who are actually responsible. And like most of the time, government is responsible for providing public goods. Most of the time, government is responsible for like installing renewable energy. And yeah, I think that's why being vocal becomes important.
Yeah, I think it's important to voice your opinion in order to kind of pressure the government to things that are actually good. But at the same time, I think it's also important to educate yourself about what you're asking. There are a lot of people, especially green environmentalists, that are asking things that are not technically possible. And they're asking a change to happen in the next 6 months, which obviously it's not going to happen because it's just not technically possible. You still have many barriers, and they're just not, you either have social barriers or you have technological barriers. And I think it's very important to not just demand stuff, but understand the barriers to your demands.
Yeah, because people need to understand like where we stand currently. Like if you're demanding change, that's great, but you also need to know where we technically stand. Like, is it feasible? Is the change that you're asking for feasible? If it is, demand it from them. Yeah.
I think it's important for everyone, not just young people, to like vocal, and it's equally important for them to learn, about the landscape, about the solutions, but it's not really the young people's responsibility to like do a feasibility study. That's the government's job. I think we should be fair in terms of who we're asking the solution or what we expect solution from the different individuals. But I completely agree. I think one of the challenge, or at least from what I noticed from the protests in Indonesia, is like we're not targeted enough in terms of demanding our solutions. And sometimes the solutions that we're demanding does not really meet the actual challenge, because climate crisis and climate change is like very complicated, and the solution is not very straightforward. That's why I think it's important, to educate yourself so you know what you're demanding.
This is a conversation that needs literally everyone from every sector, because it does affect everyone at every sector. It's just people think it's limited to the government and scientists, which is not a good idea, because one of the discussions we had before this call is how academia is trapped in its own bubble and it doesn't understand like applications outside of that. And we need to understand that in order to make the changes we want to see, it has to have everyone from every single table. It's not just scientists and government.
And everyone from different background too, right? Farmers, people who live in Jakarta, students, literally everyone actually have a role to solve climate change. Everyone can vote.
So I can give an example to that. You have like, renewable offshore wind is great because you have renewable energy, you don't use oil and gas, and seagulls don't swim in oil and don't die. At the same time, you actually have that problem that you're actually putting a thing that is actually rotating and actually has power to kill. So for example, eagles are really bad with wind turbines because their wings are very big, so they're not very flexible when they fly. So if they actually get caught up in the window that the turbine actually encloses, they actually can get killed, because at some point they're too close to the turbine, and because of the airflow they can't escape. So
I did not think this was a problem.
It is actually a problem, because with bigger birds they're just not really flexible. You have the same with devices that are in the water. So when you see the device and you're like, yeah, that's great, but actually the water, animals can't see in the water, so dolphins can't see in the water. So if you have a water turbine that's just spinning in order to generate electricity from the passing flow of water, if you have a fish or even a dolphin can be absolutely slashed by that device. And there are people who are protesting against that. We understand that it's not the solution. It still has many problems, but the point is that it is a step ahead. And it's something that will enable, you can't just make a technology that doesn't have any problems. But you can make a technology that at least in many ways it's way better than what you're currently using, and then one by one you can start making the technology better so that it stops affecting. So like the solution for birds is that they have sensors that humans don't hear but birds hear. It's not hurting them, but it's basically something that's chasing the birds away. So bird would be like, it wouldn't be hurt by it, but it would kind of be annoyed by the noise.
Oh yeah.
So this is like something that's actually, it's mandatory for all airports to have that system, because if a bird gets stuck in your plane engine, it can cost millions to fix it. Like it's not gonna take the plane down, but it's gonna need fixing, and this is gonna cost millions. So this is why they have systems that actually chase away the birds. So suddenly you actually manage to solve that problem by adding additional system, and now you eliminate one more problem and you make an even better solution.
No, that's a really good point, and it's like also very, in reality that's how it is. Like you're not going to come up with like a solution that is perfect, but you can always move marginally towards like the better solution. Because I think with public policy or like public sector, at least what I noticed or what I realized is that sometimes the option is between what's worse or like what's the more worse, and you want to choose the option that is the less worse, because at the end of the day, kind of both choices are going to affect people in different ways, both positively or negatively. It's about like there's trade-off between these two options. Which one are you going to choose, and which one represent the public interest best?
Yeah, it's always going to have drawbacks, but the important thing is to move closer and closer to actually what you need. Yeah, and then as you eliminate the problems in the future, you would actually have something that is actually good and doesn't have problems.
Yeah, because I think that was what I was referring with. Some people need to be aware of the technical issues. Is if environmentalists, we say like, okay, quote unquote environmentalists, if people protest about dolphins being killed by water turbines, because there are essentially 5 different kinds of renewable energy, right? There's biomass. Water comes in 2 forms. There's hydro and tidal, and then there's wind, solar, and geothermal.
Yeah, just to point out, so the difference what you said in water is hydro comes from the height of water, so you get hydro from falling water, while tidal and wave actually just comes from water moving in the sea, while hydro comes from rivers and lakes.
Yeah. People don't understand. Like, if you, for example, say, no, shut down that hydro system, then you're cutting off an electricity point. You're cutting off a potential renewable energy point, and we can marginally work towards a better solution, but we don't have a magical solution. It's not when telephones were first invented, the iPhone was made into creation. We slowly moved towards that point, but it was not suddenly, magical touchscreen thing that can send me information from around the world. That's not how technological advancements work. There's barriers, I guess. It's tricky.
Yeah.
It's definitely a process, and it's not a solution that will come up tomorrow, but it's something that we need to work towards.
Definitely
for the next it's not even something that will happen in the next 10 years.
It might not even happen in our
young generation won't stop worrying about that in the next 10 years. This was something that would happen in the next 50, not even the next 50 maybe. Like the golden point that we're trying to reach will not happen at least in the next 10 years.
Yeah, but I think that's the dilemma though with climate problems or like environmental problems. It's already this urgent. So I think we should be able to make the right choices or right decisions based on what we have today in order to like meet the challenge. From my understanding of the policy choices in Indonesia, we could be moving faster in terms of like renewable energy. We could be implementing feed-in tariffs, or we could be prioritizing renewable energy, but we're not there yet. We're not quite there yet. And I think this is where protesting comes in. This is where demanding these kind of policies comes in. I think we need to make sure that all the choices that are taken today is to the benefit of like the future, or like, you know, young people who's going to be living in the future.
I have an interesting analogy, and I don't know whether this will work. So let me start. The analogy that I have is, you know, when you watch Finding Nemo, and towards the end of the movie, everyone was caught in a giant net and they can't do anything about it, and they were being pulled up.
and everyone just started swimming in the opposite direction. And like, let's say that those fish swimming in the opposite direction is us making individual change. And what happens instead is we don't get pulled up by that fishing ship. We slow down that effect. So
that is such a great. No, actually, that's a perfect analogy. Like, I think literally everyone needs to be the fish who's swimming down, and down is like the sustainable economy, like the target. Because not all of us, and I think this is where if you're indifferent about it, you're not swimming, right? You're just like floating. And we need to make people who are indifferent and start swimming, so like we can have the accelerated effect of like attaining this existing policies that's going to help us.
yeah.
And it's not only influencing the policies, but it's also influencing. There's also influencing the people around you, because there is a lot of floating fish.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So many. Or they're there, and then they're like, oh yeah, sure, we're making.
There's also fish who works like against the stream. Who's that? Like, you know, like if you're part of the
let me hurtle towards my death.
Yeah, and if you know that there's this problem, yet you still choose, like if you're powerful, you still choose opt with like carbon solution. You're like swimming upward. You're swimming towards death. That's I think that's the way I see it.
I think the analogy is like good too, because those fishes are swimming gradually, like, and that's, I think, the way we should think about the way we're implementing solution. In planning, I especially learned that not all these solutions are like the best, but these are good solutions we can go through. And with good solutions, we always need to evaluate them. Oh, are we meeting the target? No, so we can make these things better now for this community. And then we do it all the time, so that we do get to that good solution. But we shouldn't limit ourselves with that one good solution when we can gradually swim for a better one.
Yeah.
We should probably explain for people who've never watched the small margin of people
I'm sure
who've never watched Finding Nemo. Towards the end of the movie, everyone gets caught in a giant fishing net, and the fishing boat is pulling us towards the surface. Okay, that surface, let's say that surface is our death. It's climate change. It's the end of the world. Our world is literally on fire. And then they decide to swim down, let's swim down. And everyone gets convinced, let's swim down. And what happens is, instead of getting pulled up, we slow down that fishing boat from dragging us down, and we swim and swim and swim until eventually
you're like swimming towards the solution, basically.
We're swimming towards the
released
solution.
by the net as the solution.
Yeah, but if only like a couple fish do it, it's obviously not gonna happen. But if everyone decides, let's do this together,
or even then try swimming.
Yeah.
Like what she said, like there's a lot of floating fishes that need to move, that need to start swimming down, I think.
I think that's
a lot of individual floating fishes who are not either swimming up or down. We need everyone to swim down.
And we have to be able to move for those who cannot do
swim
anything
down.
For those who cannot swim down, we have to help.
Yeah, that's what needs to happen to like get to the climate solution. But I do think most of us have the choice to swim down. We're just not aware. And it might not be because we don't want to educate ourselves. We're just simply removed. We're just simply unaware. That's why education is also like raising awareness of this problem, right? So you stop floating, start swimming down.
Yeah, because some people, I feel, are that floating fish in the net. They don't know that if they get dragged up, they're gonna die.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
This is turning, like, this analogy is getting better and better.
So good. It's such a good. I'm gonna start using this analogy. And I thought,
in the teaching methodology of climate change.
Use it in posters. I don't care.
Collective action and like where it can take us.
Why climate change is
Don't
not
be the indifferent fish.
Yeah.
Start swimming. Swim down. Start swimming down.
Thank you.
All right.
Or please swim.
Yes, swim at least, man.
Yeah.
Don't be that random fish floating around and going in the opposite direction. Just swim down. We're all gonna die. If not.
Yeah, we have a choice to swim down too. It's like just
that's a question I have. Which one would be better, to just float in the water and have no opinion or knowledge on stuff, or swimming up towards that?
Down.
Swim down.
No, which one do you think it's worse? Like just floating in the water, or actually just swimming in the wrong direction?
Swimming is dangerous. in my opinion, I think when you have the choice to swim down, but you don't take that choice because you're just unaware, I think that's very dangerous. It's like you're not maximizing the potential of you as a fish, right? Like you're not maximizing the insight, you're not using the whole power that you have to swim down just because you're unaware that, I don't know, of the threat of the problem. It can be many things. I think that's worse.
I think if you're floating too, right? At the end of the day, if you don't float,
You're blocking the way.
you're blocking the way, and then you end up at the top too, right? Because you're not doing any, or you are doing anything, but it's not concrete solutions. So you're just kind of also flying up at the time. And if you don't make those concrete solutions, just like demanding stuff, then you're also endangering yourself because
You're endangering yourself and your community. You know, it's
Yeah.
the that equation.
Don't just yell at people to swim down and not swim down.
Because I guess
Do it as well.
yeah, the gray colors are also as dangerous as people who are just swimming up.
You keep swimming, don't float.
Yeah. Oh,
Keep swimming, don't
the
float.
tagline for climate solution is that you have to keep swimming. Use your entire power to swim down.
Yeah, keep swimming and
Don't float.
have a
Don't
nice
float.
day.
See you
Yeah,
next
don't
time.
float, keep swimming. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Hello, hi. Thank you for listening to the Peak Boredom Podcast. This is Mars and Inga signing off, and don't forget to tune in next week. Please, bye.